Welcome to Scene Change, a podcast by the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division. All about equality, opportunity, accessibility, and the arts. Here, you'll learn adaptive techniques from performers in the know. We are changing what it means to be blind, one stage at a time. Thank you for joining us today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scene Change. Today will be an outstanding episode as I have the chance to interview an old friend and colleague in the Performing Arts Division about a field that we've not yet covered. Let's welcome today Kaiti Shelton from our Ohio affiliate, who is a music therapist who actively working to change what it means to be blind in her job every day. Welcome to the show, Kaiti.
Thanks for having me.
So take us back to your early years with music. What was the first instrument you played? Was it not an instrument at all that you got involved in, but with choir? What's your musical background in its infancy?
Actually, so to do that, we're going to go back to my literal infancy. So, when I was very, very young, like maybe 2 or 3, I was getting services from the Cincinnati Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. So I was doing their whole early intervention program. They were giving my parents resources. And at one point, a social worker recommended that we try this thing called music therapy. So my parents started taking me to these music therapy groups at the CABVI facility, and they had a totally blind music therapist running these groups for children, their families, their siblings could come in, whether they were sighted or blind. And it was just a really nice way to get to meet other families and for the kids to work on those early independent skills. So I think that was really my first foray into music. Then later on, we kind of saw in the early years, like 4 or 5, that I was a bit of a dabbler. I didn't really want to spend all my time just on one instrument, and that music therapist then later tried to teach me piano lessons. I tried violin for a little bit. After trying those things, I really didn't get into having like a dedicated instrument until 9 or 10 when I picked up clarinet for the school band. But I was also doing choir then and starting to kind of play around with piano a little bit. And it just kind of continued on through my middle and high school years. I picked up guitar, and in high school, I needed some extra credit, like service hour kind of things for student council. And a lot of the things that my classmates were doing at the school were just not very accessible to me. Like they would put window paint up for each month or something and update the calendar, and it was all in print, or it was involving like painting or something, decorating the gym for the school dances, which I mean, part of that could have been accessible, but I just wasn't also that interested in it. And I was looking for something more aligned with my interests. Then my parents suggested I contact that music therapist that I had to see if she could use any volunteers. And so she said yes. So from freshman year all the way through senior year and part of even my first or second year of college, I was going there like once a month and volunteering. And it progressed from just watching, and then in between sessions, I'd run errands for her, or I'd wipe down some instruments with just a Clorox wipe or something. To by my senior year, I was actually assisting some of the kids in like the recital and helping them play instruments and getting to be more hands-on. And about a year after I started volunteering, that's when I kind of knew this was something I wanted to look into for my job. So I always like to think on that, because it's really kind of interesting to me that I was a music therapy client initially. Not a lot of music therapists have that particular experience of actually being in the client position as well. So, and I think it helps kind of me, even though I was so young, knowing that and knowing I had this relationship with a music therapist myself helps me to um, be a resource and be have that insight for my clients.
That makes perfect sense. So would you say that your music therapist, who was also totally blind, was this person your sort of motivation for joining the field?
I think so. I She was a really great role model. I still keep in touch with her every once in a while. Um, and just it seemed like I was watching how she would interact with these families and how they'd respond. And it occurred to me that this was a blind person doing something that looked really cool and looked like it had an actual like an impact that I was really interested in. And I thought, okay, well, I can do this. And she was a tremendous resource to me through high school. I would ask her, like, hey, I'm looking at these two classes. Which one do you think would be more beneficial for a music therapist to have? And I want to do this thing or that thing over the summer, but they're at the same time. What do you think would be most beneficial for getting the skills I need before college? And that was a huge help and a huge leg up in some aspects of my training. So I'm very grateful to her for being such a great mentor.
So it sounds like you pretty much always knew that you wanted to jump into music therapy. Did you consider any other careers, be they musical or otherwise?
I did. I looked at music education, and I also looked at just being like some other subject teacher. I actually did Teacher Academy in high school, which was a program for juniors and seniors. Junior year, you spend the time learning some like teaching basics, and then in your senior year, you make a portfolio to get some college credits, and you also go out into schools and kind of student teach. It's comparable to that. So I had a long-term placement that was once a week for the whole school year in my senior year. And that was in a music ed general music class in, I think I had first, second grade, and fifth grade. And then I also had some short-term placements, which were twice a week, but only for a couple weeks at a time. Um, and I really liked, kind of randomly, sixth grade science. So I was considering going down like the sixth grade middle school science and math kind of route. I'm not a very good math person though. Um, and for a while, I thought about doing some foreign language teaching. I was doing Spanish in high school and I really liked Spanish. So I thought about doing that. Music ed eventually was kind of the front runner, and then it was a choice between ed and therapy. But it was leaning, I think, towards therapy even from junior year on until like the end of junior year when I was pretty set on it.
Now, here's a really interesting question because I know, we've had student or people who were music ed students in the past. Could you explain the difference between music therapy and music ed and what at least helped you to make your decision um, for music ed over, or sorry, for music therapy over music ed?
So for music education, it's about teaching the musical skills. So when you have a student in a music ed setting, you're teaching more the notes, you're teaching the rhythms, you're preparing for a performance, essentially throughout. And in music therapy, we do perform, and I have a clip here of some recent performances that we had. But we have more of the goal of looking at how can we use music to address non-musical goals. There's a lot of debate within music therapy as to whether you can address musical goals in therapy. I personally think that you can, but most of the time it's a non-musical goal. So, and this isn't to say that other areas of life are not influenced by music ed. I think that they are. But the main goal in a music ed classroom is to prepare for a performance and build musical skills, and then those skills of communication and gaining some social skills in a band or a choir setting by working with your peers, those are kind of secondary. But in a therapy context, we are actually using the music to specifically address communication, cognitive skills, social skills, motor skills. And so it's less about preparing for a performance. And sometimes in music therapy contexts, we don't even have performances. We do group work. So we can have a choir, we can have an ensemble, but that's not necessary. Um, we also sometimes have like recitals for individual performances, but the main thing is we are using the music to work on something else.
I gotcha. So let's hear that clip that Katie mentioned. What is this one of your classes that you were teaching, Katie? And is this sort of like an end of year performance, or what is it that we're going to hear?
This is a clip of the ukulele ensemble that I recently started. This group started in June of last year, and it's had a couple changes in members, so it's still a pretty new group. But these individuals are working on their fine motor skills and their social skills by learning this music. They're reading adaptive music, so I have a big poster board in this clip with color coded letters to show them which chords to play, and then I'm able to point to them with a drumstick to help them keep on track, and they make the changes on the ukulele so they're playing the chords in time.
Fascinating. Let's hear that right now.
Two, ready, go! Just a young gun with a quick fuse. I was uptight, wanna let loose. I was dreaming of bigger things and wanna leave my old life behind. Not a yes sir, not a follower. Hit the box, hit the hole, have a seat in the foyer. Take a number. I was lightning before the thunder, thunder, thunder.
Wow. That was just to envision you standing there pointing at these different colors, as your students are able to just follow along and have this recital and this performance. Now, I know everyone's going to be wondering, how is a blind person keeping track of which color is which and where to point on this poster board? So please do enlighten our listeners.
Yeah, so we have kind of an interesting system. We have something called an Ellison machine, which they use in schools a lot, teachers will, and it basically will allow you to punch out big paper letters for like a bulletin board or if you need just any sort of like poster or something. So that's how we make our letters. And what we found for me is that if we use cardstock, it's a thicker paper. So if we punch out the letters we need with cardstock, even after we laminate our huge poster board with our huge poster board size laminator, I can still feel where these letters are, even with the drumstick. So I can just slide the drumstick along and know where the next letter is. And then I can use the other hand on the side of the poster board to find where the next line is. So even though I can't look at the letters very well because they're just not my reading modality, I can still have a tactile component to help keep my sighted clients and sometimes even my sighted coworkers who are playing with them on track.
That is really creative. I know our listeners are going to love that and definitely steal that hack for, whenever it may come in handy for them. I definitely love learning about different forms of alternative techniques. That's what the show is all about. So you mentioned that you have some sighted clients and then sighted colleagues. Do you have any blind clients or colleagues at the moment?
I do. I have one individual who I think recently lost the remainder of their sight, but they were pretty significantly blind before. And then I have another person with a cortical visual impairment that I work with. And I have quite a few that have lesser degrees of vision loss, but they are still considered visually impaired, even if they're not familiar with that terminology themselves. Um, so a lot of times, blindness and visual impairment will co-occur along with something else. So an individual might have cerebral palsy and be a wheelchair user, or they might have Down syndrome and not necessarily present as someone that is blind because they're just wearing glasses. But often, a lot of these clients that I work with, even if it's not directly stated on their documentation or anything, there are considerations I need to make. Like, I need to make their music larger for them, or we might need to adapt some materials that we use in their sessions so that they can see them better. I don't have anyone who reads Braille. The two individuals I mentioned that have more significant degrees of blindness, one is younger, like within, I think, our age group, but that individual doesn't know Braille, and then the other one became blind later in life. So I don't have any Braille readers like right now, but these clients are some of my favorite to work with because they can really, I think, dive into the music. I've noticed they don't get as distracted as some of my other clients, and that might just be their personalities, not necessarily anything to do with visual distractions, but I really enjoy working with them.
So this brings me to a question about challenges in the field as a blind person. It sounds like you've had a good amount of support, from your own blind mentor, who's also a music therapist. And then, I would imagine that you could relate. I'm sure that you can relate to all of your students as someone who was a part of, a music therapy program before. But then perhaps even more so to your blind students as a blind person who's gone through music therapy.
Mhm.
Is this something that, I guess, are these experiences of yours, have these experiences made it easier for you? And second part to that question, even if it has been easier for you, are there still challenges that exist within the field?
Yeah, I think that in terms of building relationships with clients, I think that I have perhaps an advantage. I think I do. I can't fully quantify that, but um, they always say in therapy, like if you've been to therapy, you know what it's like. And often in therapeutic professions, students will be required to go to therapy so that they know what it's like to be a client. Music therapy doesn't have that requirement, so I think in that sense, my experiences have helped. In school, I found that there were a couple challenges just because I was the first blind student in my program. Most of my supervisors had never worked with a blind student or a blind music therapist. My professors knew of my mentor, which helped a little bit because we didn't have that initial fear that I couldn't do the program. But it involved a lot of trial and error, especially when I got into the in-person, we call them practicum classes, where you're going out to different facilities and you're basically practicing how to do music therapy with actual clients. So there were just questions of how do I document visual information that I was not going to pick up and these supervisors were used to seeing. What could I substitute to show that I was still paying attention and being responsive to what clients were showing me, but in a way that I could access because facial expressions were not going to be it. I also had not so much issues with reading music. I have a pretty good ear. Um, so I've been able to learn and memorize pretty much most of my repertoire, but um, I've had to learn how to teach printed music because that's what most of my clients read. I don't have any other Braille readers. So, having visual aids and knowing how to adapt those visual aids so that they have Braille on them so that they're accessible to the visual learners, but also myself, that was something I needed to figure out. And I've got a handle on it now, but it took some trial and error. Um, and navigating disability in these practicum sessions, that was something that I struggled with initially too. I think that in therapy, there's often um, this sense that a therapist can't or shouldn't disclose anything. And as a young student, I thought, oh, well, this session isn't about me, so I can't talk about it. It's about these people that we're working with. Um, and I don't think the supervisor had at the time um, understood enough or felt comfortable, one of the two, of walking me through that and why it was okay. So they agreed. And then it became this sense of, oh, I can't talk about it because it's not about me here, it's about the clients. But of course, they're going to know. I was on a locked memory care dementia unit in a nursing home, and these residents would ask questions and they would notice things, and it really caught me off guard. Now my approach is to just have it come up in conversation. And if it comes up in conversation, I'm happy to talk about it. And I think that that really helps me feel more at ease, because then it's not this um, secret or anything. And blindness isn't something that we need to have be a secret. And I had to just learn that, answering a client's question about me isn't going to shift the focus of the therapy onto me. It's going to still be about them. But then that also creates some nice relationship dynamics, because then they understand that I have a disability too, just like them, even if it's a different type of disability. And then I can open up and, as it's appropriate, say, oh, I've been to therapy before. And, that helps show them that maybe they're not alone, or I understand some of the things that they might be going through in some ways, even if not all of the things they're going through. So those were some of my challenges. Um, but there were a lot of good things that happened in school too.
So you've worked with clients later in life as they, face things like dementia, but then you've also worked with clients in elementary school. Do you still work with clients of all ages, and have their reactions to blindness been similar or different?
Yeah. So, in school, if anyone is a music therapy student, they're going to be required to work with older adults, with children, and in a mental health setting. Those are the three requirements that we have in training. Most of my work has been in schools with kids. That's where I did my internship. And then when I've gone to work, I've worked for about 3.5 years. Most of that has been with adults, but I do work with kids too. My youngest right now is 4. She just turned 4, and my oldest client is in their 70s. So I work with everyone kind of across the lifespan, which is really cool. Um, and it really depends. I have some young kids, like the 4-year-old, I don't think realizes anything is different about me. And they're not in a position to ask those questions yet. I have had kids that are 5 or 6 ask. And sometimes they're kids that are not my clients. They'll be kids that are coming around the building with my coworkers, and then they ask questions. Um, and then older adults, it also depends on them too, and what they're focused on and what they might be aware of. But I think kids are very inquisitive, and I think the adults that I happen to work with are very inquisitive. Um, so I have a teenager right now who, he's asked a lot of really good questions. Um, a lot of times I get the same questions from kids and adults in this particular setting. I think if I were in like a mental health setting, the adult questions might be a little different than what I might get from an elementary school student. But where I work now, it's usually, and they say it, and you can tell it's not meant in any rude way. They're just very curious. It's more like, why are your eyes like that? Do they hurt? Those sorts of questions. So it's coming from a place of concern and curiosity. Um, I do have one client who we had to work through the fact that she had not seen anyone who was blind before, and she had not seen anyone with eyes that look like mine. And we're okay now, but initially she thought they were a little creepy looking because they were just a little opaque. So we talked about how everyone has different disabilities, and in kind of a group that she is a part of. And so this person uses a wheelchair, and remember when she learned about the wheelchair, because she hadn't seen many people in wheelchairs before either. And she still, your peer still participates in the group like you do, and so my eyes look different, but I can still do these things with you together. So um, those are some of the interactions I have, but I think generally, at least where I work, everybody has been very willing to learn and willing to um, ask really great questions across from whether they're a child or an adult.
It sounds like you were able to find a really positive work environment, which is it's excellent for anyone, but especially as a blind person, because sometimes finding work can be quite difficult. So could you tell us a little bit about what that process was like, just finding not only a position, but finding the right fit where it was going to be a positive work environment and it's going to be somewhere that you could really thrive?
Yeah, so for music therapy, a lot of the positions are itinerant or they're travel based. So in a lot of cases, music therapists will go to client homes and they'll see clients in their own like living rooms or um, their own houses. I obviously can't do that. So I immediately started narrowing down my job search to facilities that were pretty self-contained. So schools and different agencies that didn't require a lot of travel. Initially, in my first year, I did kind of go between both campuses of my workplace before they were combined into one, but I was able to go with a coworker of mine. So we were on the same schedule and could just carpool between the two. So I wanted to find a facility that was not going to require me to travel. And then I also wanted to find a facility that would be receptive and understand that there are some advantages to having someone in a therapist role that also understands the disability side of things. And I brought that into my interview, and I know that conventional wisdom is that you don't talk about disability before you show up. I chose to disclose at the end of my phone interview, and I use that as kind of a metric of are these people going to be open to working with me? Do they understand that this could be an asset that I bring to the table, or is it going to be a case of, well, we work with people that have all manner of disabilities, but we don't want to hire one. So that was something that I looked for. Um, and in my interviews, I had kind of all over the map. And I had some that gave me a Zoom or a phone interview, but I knew based on kind of the subtext, they couldn't outright ask questions about, um, what would I do about this or that situation that was visual, but um, I could kind of tell they weren't going to give me the job. Um, and in this case, in the end of the phone interview, the person that ended up being my supervisor was just like, "Oh, well, we already have a music therapist that has a visual impairment, so we're probably used to at least some of it. Let's have you back for the in-person interview, and we can talk more then." Which was more of the response that I was kind of hoping to get.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So it sounds like they were already familiar with, people of varying visual acuities. And so, they were already going to be comfortable with it, which is really, really good. And that also explains probably a little bit about, part of the reason why you're able to have such a great experience is that they were open-minded, enough to hire the first person. And then, they're like, oh yeah, this is excellent. You know what I mean? Like you said, it's going to be an asset to the team. It's going to bring a different form of diversity, and a different form of thought, which is really going to benefit the clients you work with. So I'm really glad to hear about that. I highly encourage our listeners to just be encouraged by that story, because places like this do exist. You know what I mean? Did you have any other positive experiences while you were interviewing, or was this the only one?
Um, I I think that that was the most positive one.
Right.
I did have one other interview where they seemed okay. They didn't seem really nervous or off put by having me. I just didn't get that particular job, and I'm okay with that. Um, I was a brand new therapist. Actually, I wasn't even finished with my internship yet. So um, I didn't get any sense that it was based on blindness that I didn't get that particular job. I just thought, I'm a new therapist and that could happen to anybody. So, um, sometimes even if you don't get a job, I feel like as long as you're, nobody wants to be turned down for a job, but as long as you're being turned down for the same reasons anyone else would, um, that's not blind. I think that that's in its own way a net positive experience.
Exactly, because it's more about fit than it is about blindness, and that's just normal, and it's good because you also wouldn't want to be accepted just because you're blind, because that could also be really awkward.
Yeah.
So, what's a day in the life? For those who don't know, I feel like, we're really doing a deep dive into music therapy, but, like, what's a day in the life for you? How many students a day would you say, like, on average, that you're seeing? What do you have to prepare? Are you teaching different instruments? Are you still going back to that, clarinet, ukulele, guitar, back to your musical roots, or is it largely vocal? What's your schedule like?
So it's a little different every day. Like it's consistent week to week. Every day is a little different. Um, so in terms of when I get there, I usually get there between 8:30 and 9 and I start my day. Usually the first thing I do is I check my email and check in with my boss, make sure everything's kind of in normal as it can be. COVID's really kind of flipped everything upside down and it still is changing things as we are heading back into more of what I'm used to pre-pandemic. But I'll check in and then usually by 9 or 9:30 I'm starting to see my first client, um, depending on the day. And I do typically, I'd say some days are slower than others with absences and things like that. And again, COVID is still kind of playing a role in that. But um, ideally, I'd have at least 7 sessions a day. The most I've ever had is 10, and that's a lot. So 10 is not ideal. I'd say between about 6 and 8 is where I feel good. Um, and then in between those times, I will go back to my computer. I will enter documentation, which for us is also part of our billing. So I will enter those notes. I will respond to emails. I will do assessments, which is like where we annually write up where we see a client's progress, or we have quarterly reports that we do on each client as well. So I will do those. And then in between, I might work on materials. Um, Recently, my department has implemented this kind of collaborative approach. So we have just a big spreadsheet of ideas that we all need done. Um, and I have found that it's becoming more difficult for me to make some visual aids that I used to make by myself. So it's kind of nice that way because then I can put on the spreadsheet, I need these visual aids for this thing I want to do with like this particular client or group of clients. And one of my sighted coworkers can make that for me in their free time. And then if they need something that's not as visual, like they need a song for a client that works on this specific thing, then I can maybe write that for them because that doesn't require me to do a visual task. So we kind of trade off based on skills and what we are able to do in our free time, meaning just, between sessions. Usually I have mostly individual sessions, but I have at least one group per day. Um, so like on Mondays, I have my ukulele group. On Tuesdays, I have a couple groups. I have like a music games group. We actually produce our own podcast. So we have a podcast group that meets on Tuesdays to do our interviews and our editing. Um, on Wednesdays, we have a couple movement based groups. I have a group home of older ladies that I work with. So it's just like a different group every day or a couple groups. And then all the other sessions are individuals that I see for either I think I only have 1 hour session. So most are 30 or 45-minute sessions. Oh, I forgot to answer your question about the instruments. In terms of instruments, like every session is individualized, so it's a bit different for everybody. I use guitar probably the most, so guitar and voice. I don't use clarinet very much, but I will bring it out for some clients. Um, I'm getting more into using drum set in therapy, which sounds counterproductive to some, because drums can be very loud, but I use a lot of hand drums and I'm using more drum set lately. So every office in our facility has some sort of keyboard instrument. I have an electric organ in mine. Um, most have pianos, but I have the organ. Um, and then we have guitars, we have ukuleles, and a bunch of hand drums. My office is the only one other than our group space that has a drum set, so I'm fortunate in that regard. And then we have a bunch of small percussive instruments. So it really depends on what each individual client wants to do, and what they're working on. And sometimes I'll go in and I'll just have a couple different options, and then the client can choose. Do we want to do drums today? Do you want to write a song today? And I'll have different options available for them.
So do you have the opportunity to learn new instruments on the job, or are these like did you already play the drums before? I don't think you mentioned the drums, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I've learned a lot of things during school. So in school, you'll pick up a bunch of things as you go. So I picked up ukulele during college. During my last, I think, year of college, I did take a semester of drum set lessons. And
Ah.
in internship, I picked up electric bass. The good thing is, if you play guitar, ukulele, electric bass, and a couple other instruments are similar enough that you can pick them up as you go. But there are other ones I've picked up along the way while I've worked here, that I didn't get to see before. So most recently, I had a client that wants to learn trumpet, and I got really lucky in the sense that an intern that I was supervising came to us who played trumpet. So she really was the one that taught him, but I learned along with them so that when she was done with her internship, I could continue teaching this client. So I've picked up trumpet I think it's been about a year that I've played. And I'm progressing at the rate of, I'm at the point where maybe like someone that's been through a year of elementary school band. So I'm moving at a pretty average, consistent rate, but it's nice that I can kind of learn as I go.
That is nice. And not only that you can learn as you go, but that you have this opportunity to learn more instruments because it does seem like something that you're passionate about and that you really enjoy doing. So um, that's really awesome that this career opportunity offers that to people. So you mentioned COVID when you were talking about your classes. So I'm just curious to know, real quick, just how COVID has changed your classes.
They're not as different as they used to be. When COVID first hit, we went completely online. So we used Zoom. Or for some clients, we would use FaceTime. We did a bunch of different things just to try to see as many people as we still could while they were at home. Um, I did telehealth exclusively for about 2 months. And that was not ideal. It was better than nothing, but I think everybody that did it and then came off of it is pretty well done with it. Um, and then by June 2020, we were back in person, and I was still doing telehealth as well, um, because we were slowly phasing people back into the building that we use. So um, that was an interesting time because they were telling us the research was saying we shouldn't sing. Um, we shouldn't share any objects because COVID might be transmitted through touching objects and then passing them between people. We had to get really creative with groups because of the distance requirements for people to be socially distanced. Um, and not singing really changed things for us. So we had to get really creative. So I remember we were trying to put some sort of schedule together for the clients that were in person with us. And it was, um, we had like a body percussion group and we had a flash mob group, which was like a dance party kind of thing. Um, and then we had just like a music games group. So how could we adapt the things that we did before to be within all these COVID restrictions and still be therapeutic in some way? Um, so we we pulled that off to the best of our ability. It was really hard. But then thankfully, as more has come out about COVID, we've been able to resume doing some things. Like we're still social distancing now. Most of my clients are not on telehealth anymore. I only have two that are still on telehealth, which is nice because telehealth exclusively, especially, could get really draining, at least for me. Um, so now I only have two, which is great. Everyone else is back in person, and we are just now at the point where we're bringing small percussive instruments back out for people to play, because we've learned that COVID isn't very super transmissible on objects. We are still masking, so we've all had to learn how to sing through a mask and project through a mask. And the more layers you add onto that mask, so I mean, I use a filter personally, so if I have a filter in there, it's going to be even harder to project and to do it in a healthy way. Thankfully, with having so many therapists and interns around, we're able to sub out. So if our voice is getting tired, we can say, okay, I'm going to do one more song for the group, and then someone else can sub in. That way, no one's blowing their voice out. And I think other than that, it's just a lot of extra cleaning. Like we would clean before, but now we really clean between every group. With just like high quality, like hospital grade disinfectant. Um, we're making sure everybody's trying to wash their hands and use sanitizer and um, make sure everybody's kind of following the contact tracing guidelines that are still in play. So it's it's been different, but I think we're getting back to more of what we all kind of knew and liked before COVID. Finally.
Slowly but surely, right? It's just, the name of the game. When you mentioned learning to sing through a mask, it's something that I really hadn't even considered. Because so often, like, in performance style, it's okay because the performer is so far away from the audience, they don't have to wear the mask. But in a setting like this, yeah, it is really important to still be able to project through a mask. And I'm sure that's really something on the those abdominal muscles. So that's just really fascinating to consider and think about. So my last question for you is, what is the most fun part of your job?
Oh, I think for me, the most fun part is I really like working with the kids and families, um, and seeing how music can bring people together. And it works with adults too, but I have a soft spot for watching kids and families. So I had a group actually last night that it was a couple little girls who all have Down syndrome and their parents. Two out of the three there were dads, which was really cool. And they were just so engaged in these little girls that had never seen someone else with their disability before were becoming friends and like playing music together. Um, they were helping each other just kind of unprompted, and just watching these girls that might not do some of these things through outside of music come together in the music and just be excited and be kids and play together was so nice. So I would encourage anyone that's interested in this field to kind of check it out and see if it might be for you, because it's really rewarding and I enjoy it a lot. There's a lot of good things about it.
Yeah, that definitely comes through. Just your passion for your work and how much you really do enjoy it. So thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today. We've certainly been able to see how you are using disability as an asset. I love that you use that word, with your colleagues, with your employers, with your clients, most of all. It's been really nice getting to know you more in the professional sense. I've worked with you before and gotten to know you, but didn't know as much about music therapy. So really got to learn a lot more about the job and just the way that you're navigating things. And I think that it's really going to motivate our listeners to consider another option for work if they hadn't known much about it before. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And thanks to our producer, Shane Lowe, who is going to do some amazing editing and, chopping up with this episode. He's going to add in some fun effects and things like that for us. So thank you, Shane. Thank you to the entire Performing Arts Division podcast team. And of course, to you, our loyal listeners. This has been another episode of Scene Change.
I'm Caitlin McIntyre, President of the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Scene Change. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit our website at nfb-pad.org. There you'll find links to our social media, membership, and resources for blind performers. Thanks to everyone who makes this show happen. Scene Change is produced by Shane Lowe, Joe Schuneman, Precious Perez, Chris Nussbaum, Seun Choi, and Aaron Jordan, with music by Ryan Strunk and Tom Page. Remember, you can be the performer you want. Blindness is not what holds you back. We'll see you next time.